This is an Alocasia jacqueline, the simple houseplant that single-handedly ruined my aquarium. Last time you saw this tank, it was a perfectly balanced world, lush, vibrant, and thriving. But nature has a way of reminding us that humans being in control is only an illusion. This is the story of a microscopic war, a fragile ecosystem, and the battle to reclaim a world on the brink of collapse. I came home from my holiday travels to a bit of a surprise. Something was off. The plants above the waterline, once colorful and prospering, looked dull, wilted, and plagued with brown tips. It seemed especially odd because I was only gone for just a few days, and when I left, I saw nothing to be concerned with. At first, I thought it might be a water issue, but everything below the surface seemed perfectly fine. Then, I inspected closer and found the real culprit. Spider mites. Tiny sap-sucking pests that can wreak havoc on plants. They pierce the plant's cells to feed, leaving behind a trail of discoloration, wilting, and, if left untreated, eventual death. These minuscule arachnids are nearly invisible to the naked eye, often going unnoticed until damage is too severe to do anything. They thrive in dry conditions, multiplying rapidly and spinning delicate webs as they colonize new territory. Once they take hold, they can decimate a plant's ability to photosynthesize, draining its vitality with ruthless efficiency, killing the plant. I should have been more vigilant because just a week earlier, I threw out an Alocasia jacqueline from Home Depot that had a bad mite infestation. Honestly, I was only concerned with my other houseplants. I didn't even think about my aquariums. It completely slipped my mind that the sweet flag was out of the water. But even being in the same room, it looks like some of those uninvited guests jumped ship onto these riparian plants. My first step was damage control. I trimmed off most of the leaves that were too far gone, trying to salvage whatever I could. Then it was time for treatment. I opted for a non-chemical approach, since whatever method I chose to treat this would in all likelihood leach into the water, and I didn't want to harm the inhabitants. A simple mix of rubbing alcohol and water has been proven to be effective against these creatures. Alcohol kills the mites on contact with the added benefit of not introducing any harsh pesticides into the tank. I thoroughly sprayed every inch of the affected plants, paying special attention to the undersides of the leaves where mites love to hide. With their expert ability to evade detection, I took extra care to coat each of the many thin leaves, ensuring that no spot was left untreated. Then, I wiped the leaves with a paper towel to remove any remaining pests, pressing gently, trying to avoid damaging the delicate plant tissue. Of course, some of that alcohol likely made its way into the water, so I did a big water change to dilute and remove any residual effects of the alcohol. Safety first. As you know, I've already had my fair share of issues with this tank. The last thing I wanted to do was trade one problem for another. I repeated the treatment every 3 days for about 2 weeks, and finally, the infestation was gone. The plants are still recovering, but they've already been showing signs of new growth and their coloration is returning. One day, I was surprised to witness a very strange sight. Some of the snails were floating, not their usual tumble from the top, but suspended mid-water, even going up towards the surface as if they were being pulled by a tractor beam. They were gliding like tiny little astronauts on the moon. I had no idea that they could do that or what made it possible. But one thing was certain, it looked absolutely mesmerizing. Around the same time, I noticed an unusual congregation. The snails were gathering by the masses within the filter's outflow tube, packed together like it was a nightclub. I'm starting to enjoy the antics of these odd little invertebrates more and more every day. 3 weeks after the completion of the spider mite treatment, the plants were showing signs of recovery. The fading stems had begun to sprout fresh, green growth, but above the waterline still appeared thin and sparse. So I made the decision to introduce new foliage into the embankment area. The shopkeeper assured me that these plants would soon adapt to their new environment, with their leaves transforming as they reached above the waterline. I also transplanted a pair of Amazon swords from another one of my tanks, hoping to get them to grow above the surface, something I've never been able to do before. To ease the transition, I misted the plants several times a day, maintaining a humid microclimate to wean them from submerged growth to immersed growth. But nature had more surprises in store. Just a few days later, the water turned yellowish and hazy, cloaking the tank in a soft, ethereal mist. It looked like a scene from a movie, mysterious, tranquil, and slightly eerie. This made me really look at the tank with a lot more attention while analyzing the problem. For the first time, I thought to myself, wow, the grass has really been taking off with its growth. It hasn't been trimmed in months, but I really like this wild look. However, the newly added immersed plants were dying back very badly as they adapted to their new environment. The true source of the haze remained a mystery, though I suspected it may have come from the flowering structures on the new plants dying off. Rather than intervene, I decided to let nature run its course, trusting the ecosystem to restore its own balance. As 1 week passed by, the haze vanished, without any assistance from me. The water regained its clarity, revealing the vibrant, dynamic world beneath the surface. With its misty veil lifted, it became clear just how self-sustaining this ecosystem had become. The plants, battered from their transition, had begun to show signs of resilience, with fresh leaves promising that this small, self-contained world was indeed capable of maintaining itself. These days, the tank runs almost entirely on autopilot, or at least as much as it can. My routine is pretty simple. I feed the fish, top off the water, and occasionally thin out the floating plants when they get a bit too egregious. I've also continued misting the plants, a technique someone in the comments of the last video recommended to maintain humidity, helping them have better foliage. During the misting process, the droplets of course land on the hardscape above the water. I love how these stones look when they're wet but not fully submerged. The main stone has a noticeable depression on the backside that I always fill up, creating a shallow puddle just for some added character. As for the inhabitants, they seem as content as ever. The fish dart around all day, the snails continue their curious explorations, and the plants continue to grow. I finally got the hydrocotyle to sprout its first leaf above the waterline on its own. My Amazon sword plants are also starting to sprout their own immersed leaves. In this small, self-contained world, life carries on, dynamic, unyielding, and quite frankly, fascinating. But just when everything seemed to be perfect, I saw something. The spider mites were back.